And one of the myths of this whole period is that you had a little Israel, small Zionists against the Palestinians, and then later on in the war, when the Arab states invaded, that it was David versus Goliath. They were facing overwhelming odds, and this was simply not true. Because even then, Israel, from May of 48 on, had more troops than the Arab states, who had very small armies. See what I mean? So, but that's one of those things that many people believe. When you had the Arab state invasion, Egypt, Syria, you had Iraqi troops, you had some Saudi, the Lebanese did very little. And you had the Transjordanians. This will become Jordan, which includes the West Bank after 1948. Well, when they invaded, there was no coordination because no one trusted Abdullah of Transjordan because he had been dealing with the Zionists in sort of what we might call a non-aggression pact. Although many Israeli historians deny this vociferously, there clearly were discussions and agreements. And although maps show that when you have this attack, you have what we call a Transjordanian attack against Israel, in fact, there was really no attack per se. They were holding on to positions in the West Bank, but where you did have conflict was over Jerusalem. But the Israelis were able, the Zionists, well, they were Israelis after May 14th. When they were confronting the Egyptians, for example, or other people, they really didn't have to worry about their backs in terms of where the Jordanians were, because the Jordanians weren't going to attack them.
While the war was going on, the Zionists increased their ethnic cleansing operations. Villagers were expelled en masse, and massacres occurred in many places. The villages of Hula, Saliyah, and Bassa were but a few to suffer such atrocities during 1948. Once Zionist troops occupied a village that resisted them, they would round up all the men according to lists the intelligence officers would provide. On the whim of the local commander, they would either shoot them or march them away. The biggest expulsion and massacre happened in the city of Lid Ramle. 50,000 people were expelled from the city in a single day. 426 men, women, and children were killed by the Zionist forces. The general in charge of the occupation and expulsion of Lid Ramle was Yitzhak Rabin, who would later become Israel Prime Minister, serving 2 terms. In 1948, the Chicago Sunday Times reported on the Israeli tactics. Practically everything in their way died. Riddled corpses lay by the side of the roads. The New York Herald Tribune wrote, "The corpses of Arab men, women, and even children strewn about in the wake of the ruthlessly brilliant charge." The London Economist reported, "The Arab refugees were systematically stripped of all of their belongings. Then, they were sent on their trek to the frontier."
بدهم يطلعونا، صاروا يطخوا. نحن آخر إشي طلعنا على الأرض، قعدنا برا وشتاء بتشارين. تشارين شو شتاء عنا، شتاء ما بدناش نطلع، ما بدنا نطلع. اجوا الجيش صفونا، انا بحكي عن بيت اهلي يعني، صفونا كلياتنا هيك وبدهم نرجعون. صرخت لهم امي، قالت لكم دخلكم، نحن بنطلع بنقعد بالشتاء برا وما تقتلوش.
فاتوا على البلد هاجموها اخر هجوم، لاقوا غير الختياريات ما كانوش كم وحده، لسه متخبيات بالبلد محل هيك تبان هذا بحطوا فيه تبن للبقر بخزنه. لسه متخبي هو مع الختياريات. ولد عمره 16 سنة ياسر علوطي اسمه. كانت دارهن هون عن حارة المنزول. هسه اطلعوا معهن مع النسوان، طلعوهن لما استهدوا عليهن، طلعوهن هن ماخذينه لغاد شوي طاخينه.
كيف كانت البلد لما رجعتي؟ متذكري كانت فاضي؟
شو وهري، شو فاضي. عم بقول لك اول ما رجعت فتنا الطريق من هون ماشيين، وميلت على هذا البيت اشوف شو صار فيه. بعد القتلة في الارض والكلاب عم تاكل فيه. كان طفل بين ايديهم ياكلوا فيه. فاتت وراي مرت خالي قلت لها بدك اطلعي شو هتشوفي؟ بتقدريش يا كثير الغلبه قالت لي، الا تفوتي اطلعي. قعدت مده احلم فيه هذا الولد كيف كانت شكلته.
The Arab armies succeeded in occupying several remote Jewish settlements for a few days. They also successfully attacked army convoys. But the final victory, unsurprisingly, belonged to the Zionists. They conquered 80% of Palestine, destroyed 531 villages, 11 urban neighborhoods and towns. Approximately 750,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed and were forced to leave everything behind as they fled for their lives. However, the ethnic cleansing didn't stop in 1948. It just shifted gear. In 1967, in the Six-Day War, Israel conquered what was left of Palestine, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Now, the remaining 20% of Palestine and all the Palestinians were under Zionist control.
So it was really the whole spectrum of Zionist views from left to right were represented in the government that made the most important decision on the future of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip on the 19th of June 1967. And the decision was very clear. The decision was, there were actually three decisions taken at the time, and I don't think much, unfortunately, has changed. The first decision was that unlike 1948, the Israeli government cannot decide on the mass expulsion of the Palestinians from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It was for me, looking at that document, a reaffirmation, if I needed one, that the Israeli political elite was aware of the ethnic cleansing it committed in 1948. So in 1967 they said very loud and clear, we cannot do what we did in 1948. They say very clearly in their documents. So they can't expel. Not that it prevented them from expelling hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the West Bank in particular, but also from the Gaza Strip. But this was not similar to the ethnic cleansing of 1948 because it was not a systematic mass expulsion of the people from their country. It was expulsion of locations according to different strategic considerations of the Israeli army that wanted to downsize the number of Palestinians under Israeli control. So the first decision was not to continue the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in the same way that it was committed in 1948. The second decision was that unlike the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, which the Israelis occupied in 1967 as well, unlike those two territories, which the Israeli government at the time recognized as belonging respectively to Egypt and Syria, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were part of Israel forever.